Louis XIII was succeeded by his 5-year-old son, Louis XIV. The boy's Spanish mother, Anne of Austria, was regent. Richelieu's successor, the Italian Cardinal Mazarin, was first minister. The royal family lived at first in the Palais Royal, formerly the Palais Cardinal, which the king had inherited from Richelieu. The authority exercised by Cardinal Mazarin was greatly resented. The Paris Parliament, a legal body which ratified the king's laws, felt threatened. The aristocracy felt deprived of the power they thought appropriate to their noble rank. The troubles were known as the Fronde, which means the sling. Stones were being slung at the government. Although there was warfare, the Fronde did not go as far as the civil war in England. However, the young king was obliged to leave Paris, and he never forgave the city and the Parisians for their treatment of him. When the king and his mother returned to Paris in 1652, having defeated the rebels, they moved into the Louvre, still partially moated and more defensible. The only parts habitable were the Lescaut wing, the King's Pavilion, and the South Wing, which extended from the King's Pavilion to the medieval southeast tower. Little is known of the decoration of the Queen Mother's apartment on the ground floor of the South Wing, but the distribution of rooms is clear. Entrance was through the Salle des Cariatides and the Tribunal, A and B on the plan. C and D were guard rooms used for large-scale entertainments. E was the Queen's antechamber, and F the small cabinet. At G was the Chambre de Parade, or state-room, which is probably the room which 2 Dutch visitors in 1657 described as being furnished with a small brocaded daybed and chairs. A table, side tables, and other chairs were enamelled in blue, with small multicoloured flowers. The walls were hung with landscapes by Pierre Patel. The marquetry of the floor was of scented wood. In the oratory at H hung Lebrun's painting of the Crucifixion with Angels of 1661. The Queen Mother's bedroom at I was decorated by the painter Eustache Le Sueur. The ceiling was divided into compartments, as was then the fashion. In the centre, Le Sueur painted 3 children garlanded with flowers. The other compartments contained grotesques matching those on the doors and shutters. Above the doors were painted children asleep or playing with precious vases. In the alcove where the bed was placed, Le Sueur painted Juno sending Iris to the realm of sleep to invite the shade of Ceyx to appear in a dream to his widow Alcyone. It was in this room that the Queen Mother died in 1666. In the Queen's bathroom at J, the floor, pilasters, and columns were of black and white marble. The bases and capitals were of chiselled bronze. On the walls were sculpted baskets of flowers and fruit, gilded and coloured. The ceiling paintings, also by Le Sueur, were 2 octagons, one representing Jupiter with Juno, Venus, Minerva and Mars giving orders to Mercury, the other showing Minerva presiding at the assembly of the Muses. On the walls were monochrome blue paintings representing the Queen's virtues: simplicity, fidelity, magnanimity, strength, justice. Above these were hung portraits by Velázquez of Anne's Spanish family. One of these, that of the Infanta Maria Margarita, is still in the Louvre. The bath itself, carved from a block of white marble, was situated in an alcove, separated from the rest of the room by marble columns. The alcove's walls were decorated with water nymphs and divinities, and its ceiling with monochrome blue paintings telling the story of Psyche. Of this apartment, completed between 1653 and 1655, virtually nothing now remains. Anne of Austria found her apartment in the south wing too hot in summer, and had the ground floor of the Petite Galerie converted to be her summer residence. From 1655 to 1658, Louis XIV was employed to divide the gallery into a suite of 5 rooms. He also enlarged the narrow passage from the King's Pavilion, which was now joined to a rotunda on 2 levels. The Queen Mother's summer apartment included the Rotonde de Mars at A and the Salle de Mécène at B. Her antechamber was the Salle des Saisons at C. Her vestibule, the Salon de la Paix, at D. Her grand cabinet, the Salle de Septime Sévère, at E. Her bedchamber at F, and her small cabinet at G. H was the Salle d'Auguste. I was the oval bathroom, and J the oratory. Thibaut Poisson sculpted the dome of the rotunda, but medallions and paintings were not completed until the 19th century. The Salle de Mécène was intended to be decorated by the painter Charles Erard and his collaborator Noël Coipel, but it seems that they did no work there, and the painting dates from when the rooms became part of the first museum. Louis XIV hung some of his collection on the walls of the Salle de Mécène. These included Veronese's Susanna and the Elders, still in the Louvre, and his Rebecca and Eleazar, now at Versailles. The remainder of the apartment was decorated by the painter Giovanni Francesco Romanelli and the sculptor Michel Anguier. The Queen's antechamber, the Salle des Saisons, is decorated with the 4 seasons in the corners. The rest of the paintings shows scenes from the story of Apollo and Diana. The ceiling's circular central panel depicts the god and goddess. On the north side is Apollo with the Muses. On the south side are Diana and Actaeon. On the west side are Apollo and Marsyas. On the east side are Diana and Endymion. Anguier's stucco sculptures of satyrs and herms draw these paintings together into a harmonious whole. Next comes the vestibule, opening onto the palace gardens, as seen in this painting of about 1820. It became the Salon de la Paix when, in 1659, the peace treaty of the Pyrenees ended the war between France and Spain. The oval central ceiling painting presents peace, the fruit of victory. Flanked by stucco figures of the rivers Seine and Rhône, the northern tympanum has a painting of peace, setting fire to a heap of weapons. The southern tympanum shows the goddess of agriculture, with the rivers Loire and Garonne at either side. The eastern and western sides show more stucco ornamentation. Around 1800, when the formerly royal Louvre became a national museum, the dividing walls of this suite of rooms were demolished for it to become a single gallery. The ceilings, however, were retained by Jean-Armand Raymond, architect of the Louvre from 1798 to 1804, in such a way that the gallery was still divided into distinctly separate spaces. The Salon de la Paix was distinguished by the placing there of the grey granite columns looted from the tomb of Charlemagne at Aachen. They can be seen in this anonymous painting of about 1826, looking south from the Salle des Saisons. The décor of the Grand Cabinet, or Salle de Septime Sévère, is devoted to the exploits of Rome. In the ceiling's central panel, Romanelli depicts poetry and history celebrating the warlike exploits of Rome. Above the cornice, paintings on the coving show, on the northern side, Mucius Scaevola, in the presence of Lars Porsena, the Etruscan king, placing his hand in the sacrificial fire to prove his fortitude. To the west, the rape of the Sabine women. To the east, the continence of Scipio, refusing a large ransom and freeing a beautiful young captive. To the south, representatives of the Senate offer the purple to Cincinnatus, who returned to his humble farm after serving as dictator, thus demonstrating his civic virtue and humility. The Queen's bedchamber is adorned with allegories of her virtues. The ceiling's centerpiece depicts the religious and theological virtues. Tympana at the north and south ends show examples of human virtue. Judith and Holofernes, Esther and Ahasuerus. Semicircular tympana, west and east, show allegories of human virtue. Roundels show genii. Angier's stucco figures again make this a coherent whole. The small cabinet had a lower ceiling, with a painting of Minerva seated on a trophy of arms, accompanied by fame and victory. This painting is now in the Palais des Beaux-Arts in Lille. The wall panels framed Romanelli's paintings of the life of Moses, some of which still exist in the Louvre or at Compiègne. When these two rooms were combined, around 1800, the architect Raymond contrived to continue the ceiling of the bedroom over both parts of the Salle des Antonins. The window at the south end, overlooking the river, known as Charles IX's window, was blocked off, and the statue of the Laocoon, which was part of Napoleon's booty, became the focal point of the gallery, as seen in this anonymous watercolour. Louis XIV's apartments were on the first floor of the King's Pavilion. On this plan, A was the guardroom, hung with tapestries, lit by chandeliers, and used for balls and ballets. B was the antechamber, similarly furnished and used. The tapestries, chandeliers, and stuccoed ceiling are to be seen in this print by Israel Silvestre. C was the Gallery of Royal Portraits, soon to be the Galerie d'Apollon. D, the Salle du Dôme, soon to be the Rotonde d'Apollon. This room had stuccos by Francesco Caccia, but like the Rotonde de Mars beneath it, no ceiling paintings. The present decoration dates from the 19th century. The room was used for the reception of special embassies and foreign princes. The Duke of Modena, Don John of Austria, and Queen Christina of Sweden were received there. E was the King's Grand Cabinet, newly created when Louvre widened the passageway from the King's Pavilion to the Petite Galerie. The ceiling received a painting by Nicolas Poussin of time defending truth from the attacks of envy and discord. It had been created in 1641 for the Palais Cardinal, passed into the possession of the royal family at the death of Mazarin, and is still in the collections of the Louvre. F was the king's stateroom, or chambre de parade, substantially unchanged from the time of Henri II. Louis had alterations made to the doors. G was the king's bedchamber. Louvre was requested to modernize it in 1654. The fireplace was moved and remodelled with sculptures by Gilles Guérin. The new ceiling, now in the colonnade wing, was also sculpted by Gilles Guérin. The oval central compartment contained a painting by Eustache Le Sieur, an allegory of victorious monarchy. The painting has not survived, but preliminary studies exist. The slaves and trophies were sculpted by François Girardon and Thomas Regnaudin. The allegorical figures of fame were by Laurent Magnier and Nicolas Legendre. The Cupids of the alcove were also remodelled by Gilles Guérin. H was the king's small cabinet. When the king married in 1660, there was an enfilade of 5 rooms for Queen Marie-Thérèse on the first floor of the south wing, next to the king's apartments. The mythological and allegorical decoration was painted by Noël Coipel, under the direction of Charles Erard. The royal chapel was on the first floor of the Pavillon de l'Horloge. In 1660, Louis was appointed to oversee the completion of the Louvre quadrilateral. When fire badly damaged the upper floor of the Petite Galerie in 1661, Louis was in charge of the reconstruction. At the same time, he doubled the size of the Petite Galerie by adding another gallery to the west of it, with 2 further additions to that at its northern and southern ends. The fire destroyed the gallery of royal portraits, which occupied the upper story of the Petite Galerie above the Queen Mother's summer apartment. While Louis supervised the reconstruction of the long rectangular room with barrel-shaped vaulting, the painter Charles Lebrun devised the artistic programme of paintings, sculptures, and other designs which would create the Gallery of Apollo. Louis XIV had danced the role of Apollo in the Ballet de la Nuit in 1653, and was now in the process of becoming the Sun King. His avatar was Apollo. Lebrun's overall design included geometrical patterning. The ceiling and coving paintings were oval or octagonal, or framed by a combination of straight and curved lines. Those portions of the ceiling described as grotesques combined geometrical, organic, and figurative forms. Ceiling paintings were to show periods of Apollo, the sun god's progress through the sky: night, evening, morning, dawn. In the centre, the triumph of Apollo over the serpent of darkness, Python, was not painted until the time of the Second Republic, in 1850 to 1851, by Eugène Delacroix. Lebrun himself completed only 2 of this series before the king's new preoccupation took him to Versailles. Night, or Diana, 1660 to 1672. Evening, or Morpheus, 1664 to 1677. The others came later. The Morning Star, or Castor, by Antoine Renoux in 1781, and Dawn, by Charles Muller in 1850. The 4 paintings representing the four seasons on the coving above the cornice were added in the 18th century. Spring by Antoine François Calais in 1780–81, Summer by Louis Duhamel in 1774, Autumn by Jean-Hugues Taraval in 1769, and Winter by Jean-Jacques Lagrenet in 1778. At each end, north and south of the long hall, the tympanum holds a semicircular painting. At the south end, Lebrun painted the Triumph of Neptune and Amphitrite, or the Triumph of Water, from 1664 to 1677. The north tympanum was not decorated until the 19th century, when, in 1850, Joseph Benoit Guichard painted the Triumph of Cybele, or of Earth. Louis XIV's obsession with Versailles terminated his and Lebrun's interest in the Louvre. The walls of the Galerie d'Apollon, with their woven portraits of the creators of the Louvre, owe their decoration to the direction of Félix Duban under the Second Republic. The decorative and sculptural stuccos which surround the paintings above the cornice come, however, from the designs of Lebrun and were created in the 17th century. The sculptural figures represent the 12 hours of the day, the 12 months of the year, and the 12 signs of the zodiac. The Muses are there as well, and prisoners of war. Winged owls support a royal coat of arms above the tympana. They also mark the corners of the decorative squares in which the oval paintings are contained. The 12 months are represented by medallions depicting each month's occupations. Eight of the signs of the zodiac are represented as single figures. 4, supporting the central painting, are paired. The 9 Muses, who also come under the authority of Apollo, are represented under the northern tympanum by Calliope, sculpted by Gaspard Marcy. The other Muses are shown in pairs. Under the northern tympanum, the river god of Hippocrene, the river of Parnassus, home of the Muses, was sculpted by François Girardon. A further series of sculptures equates the king with Apollo and extols his warlike ambitions. Pairs of captives, from the 4 continents, Europe, Africa, America, and Asia, are at the bases of the panels of grotesques. The powerful presence of Louis XIV is further emphasized by the coats of arms and by the pattern of the cornice, alternating crowned initial L's with fleurs de lis. 13 large Savonnerie carpets, from designs by Charles Lebrun, were ordered for the Galerie d'Apollon and were delivered on the 7th of October 1667. 93 similar carpets were designed for the Grande Galerie and delivered between 1668 and 1689. They were never used there. Some were given as diplomatic gifts. Some were dispersed during the Revolution. Raymond Bourdillon received 44 Savonnerie carpets, including 28 of those intended for the Grande Galerie, from the Directoire in 1797 as payment for horse fodder supplied to the Revolutionary Army. 35 carpets remain in the Mobilier National. One of the carpets made for the Grande Galerie was sold at Christie's in May 2000 for $1,326,000. The outside of the Petite Galerie was also modernized at this time. The decorative Renaissance exteriors were replaced by more restrained classical facades. This alteration was reversed when the Galerie d'Apollon was completed under the Second Republic. From 1661 to 1663, work on the south wing of the Louvre doubled its length so that it matched the west wing, with pavilions at each end and in the middle. The north wing received similar treatment, following the pattern of Lescaut's and Le Mercier's designs. Work also began on completing the square with an east wing designed by Levaux. At the same time, from 1659 to 1662, the Tuileries Palace was being extended northwards. Levaux's designs for this extension matched the earlier southern wings and the riverside Pavillon de Flore, joining the Tuileries to the Grande Galerie. This extension contained an immense theatre, estimated to have had space for an audience of between 6,000 and 8,000 spectators. The stage was designed by Carlo and Ludovico Vigarani to house their spectacular scene-changing machinery. The theatre became known as the Salle des Machines. It was inaugurated in 1662, but was only used twice during the reign of Louis XIV. Its vast size made its acoustics bad, and it was also difficult to fill the auditorium. When it was remodelled in the 18th century, the new theatre, both stage and auditorium, fitted into the space occupied by the stage alone in the original construction. When Cardinal Mazarin died in 1661, Louis XIV refused to appoint a new First Minister, declaring that he himself would rule. Jean-Baptiste Colbert had the king's confidence and became First Minister in all but name, but acting only under the direct command and authority of the king. Colbert seems to have been somewhat dissatisfied with Louvo's architectural style. When he became superintendent of building works in 1664, work was suspended on Louvo's designs for the east front of the Louvre. Colbert did, however, set Louvo to work on making the Tuileries a suitable royal residence. The medieval city wall between the Louvre and the Tuileries had been removed in 1662, when, to celebrate the birth of the king's son, that space had been converted to an arena for a spectacular carousel, something like a cross between a tournament and an equestrian ballet. This space is still called the Place du Carrousel. Now, from 1664 to 1666, the height of the central pavilion of the Tuileries and of its wings was raised. Louvo and his assistant François d'Orbay followed the outline of Le Mercier's Pavillon de l'Horloge in the design of his central pavilion, adding a rectangular dome. When Louis's mother died in the Louvre in 1666, the king and court moved to Saint-Germain-en-Laye. He never returned to the Louvre, but moved into the Tuileries in 1667. New gardens were also laid out by André Le Nôtre, the future designer of the gardens of Versailles. The foundations of Louvo's east wing had already been laid when work was stopped. They still exist. At the southern end, construction had reached the first floor. But Louvo's designs were considered out of date. He had retained a dry moat, although such defences were no longer thought necessary. His decoration was sober, while magnificence was what was now required. In 1664, Colbert had all the architects of Paris examine Louvo's plans, which were widely criticized. Colbert invited these architects to submit their own designs, the best of which would be chosen. Some designs already existed. Jacques Le Mercier, architect of the Pavillon de l'Horloge, had drawn up a design including 5 of his square domes before his death in 1654. Antoine Léonard Houdin had devised a plan in 1661. It was part of a vast and impractical scheme to unite the Louvre and the Tuileries. There would be a huge circular piazza to the east of the Louvre, echoed by an elliptical arena to the west of the Tuileries. The project also involved the demolition of the church of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois and of the central part of the Tuileries. None of the designs submitted by French architects found favour. Colbert then had recourse to Italian architects. Most of them paid no attention to the existing building, and their style was far too Italianate for French taste. Gian Lorenzo Bernini, a brilliant sculptor and architect, celebrated for his work at St. Peter's in Rome, did, however, please the king with his second project. The Pope gave permission for him to go to Paris, where he was much feted and also much disliked, especially by French architects, for his conceit, his arrogance, his scorn of all things French, and also because he was Italian. His fourth scheme was approved and accepted by the king. The foundation stone was laid, a commemorative medal was struck, and work continued on the foundations after Bernini had been sent home loaded with gifts. But although the Italian workmen did not leave France until 1667, Colbert was already looking for a new solution in 1666. Bernini's Louvre was not built, and the only lasting tangible memorial of his stay in France is the magnificent bust of Louis XIV that he sculpted in 1665, and which is now at Versailles. Colbert's premier commis, or chief clerk, was Charles Perrault, the author of the fairy tales. He persuaded Colbert to form a committee consisting of his brother, Claude Perrault, a doctor, Charles Lebrun, and Louis Levaux. In April 1667, the king, having definitively decided to proceed no further with Bernini's plans, invited these three to work together unanimously and completely. Two projects were submitted to the king. He chose the one with the colonnade, attributed to Claude Perrault. Its originality lies in the spacing of the freestanding columns, which rise in pairs instead of being evenly spaced. The rhythm of this arrangement is majestic and stately. The royal apartments were to be in the new east wing. This would involve no alteration to Levaux's south wing. But space would be needed in front of this side of the palace to ensure privacy and security. Many buildings would have to be acquired and demolished. This proved an insurmountable problem. It was then decided to situate the royal apartments in the south wing, overlooking the river. Levaux's wing was too narrow and would have to be doubled in width. Perrault's scheme obliterated Levaux's façade. Building began in 1668. Main work on the colonnade was concluded in 1670. The two huge blocks of stone for the central pediment were raised in 1672. Stability of the building was ensured by Perrault's use of iron bars to strengthen load-bearing stonework. To Louis himself, the Louvre was of little interest. Already in 1668 he had employed Levaux to enlarge his father's hunting lodge at Versailles. By 1678, further improvements included the Hall of Mirrors. This was the year in which building ceased at the Louvre. After 1680, there is no mention of it in royal accounts. In 1682, the whole court and government administration was moved to Versailles. A map dating to 1694 shows the north and east wings of the Louvre still unroofed. In 1739, they are still roofless. There was no hope for Perrault's 1674 scheme to unite the Louvre and the Tuileries. Louis XIV wanted to be seen as a protector of the arts and sciences. Here his portrait surmounts a still life of artistic and scientific objects in a painting by Jean Garnier. One of the institutions which came under Louis's control was the French Academy. It had been formed by Cardinal Richelieu in 1635, when he turned the informal meetings of a group of writers into a state body charged with purifying the French language. It was to produce a French dictionary and a French grammar. The dictionary was eventually published nearly 60 years later, in 1694. The grammar finally appeared nearly 3 centuries later, in 1932. When Richelieu died in 1642, his role as protector of the Academy was taken over by the Chancellor of France, Pierre Séguier. When he died in 1672, King Louis adopted the title of Protector and provided a meeting room for the Academy in the Salle des Cariatides in the Louvre. The Académie royale de peinture et de sculpture had been founded in 1648, and under Colbert in 1661 began to meet in the Palais Royal. Apparently following the example given by Charles II in England when he became patron of the Royal Society in 1663, Louis XIV established further academies, in order to enhance the prestige of the kingdom and to extend authority over more and more branches of artistic and scientific activity. The Académie des Inscriptions et Belles-Lettres, or Petite Académie, was founded in 1663 to oversee the inscriptions on statues and medals glorifying the monarch. In 1683 it was transferred to the Louvre and allowed to meet in the room of the Académie Française. It became the Académie des Inscriptions et Médailles in 1701. The Académie royale des sciences was founded in 1666. The Académie d'Opéra, founded in 1669, became the Académie royale de musique in 1672. As it existed almost solely to perform operas, it operated at court and in public theatres. In 1692 the Salle des Cariatides was required to house the royal collection of antique sculptures, and the Académie Française had to be given other accommodation in the Louvre. It was no doubt this event which triggered the allotment of rooms in the Louvre to all the academies, except those of music and science. There they would join the printworks, the medal mint, and the numerous artisans, craftsmen, and artists who already populated the palace. The Académie des Sciences followed them there in 1699. All the royal academies were dissolved during the Revolution in 1793. Under the Directoire, they were reconstituted as the Institut National and had their first meeting in the Salle des Cariatides on the 15th of Germinal, year 4. They transferred in 1806 to the Collège des Quatre Nations, which then became and remains the Institut de France. After the departure of the royal family and court to Versailles, 400 paintings remained in the Louvre, displayed in the Salon du Dôme in the Rotunda and in the Galerie d'Apollon on the upper floor of the Petite Galerie. In 1692, when the king allotted the Palais Royal to his nephew, Philippe d'Orléans, as a reward for marrying Louis's legitimated daughter, Mademoiselle de Blois, the antique marbles housed there were removed to the Louvre, together with casts sent back to Paris by pupils at the Académie de France in Rome, and placed by the king's command in the Salle des Cariatides to form a gallery of antique sculpture. All these could be viewed on request by artists and art lovers. The Louvre took another step on the way to becoming a museum when in 1699 the Académie de Peinture et de Sculpture held an exhibition in the Grande Galerie. Many of the artworks shown then are still to be seen in the Louvre or at Versailles, or in other great collections like the Hermitage. This exhibition became a regular event. In 1725 it was held in the Salon Carré on the upper floor at the east end of the Grande Galerie, and the show came to be called the Salon.